So good morning, I'm Montison from Crystal Lake College. So today I will be discussing our um, formative assessment of our subject Seamanship 4, which is given by our instructor, Chief Officer Aldi Reyes. So for the task 1, we are given to outline the layout of the IMDG code volume 1 parts 1 to 2 and 4 to 7 code. So for part 1, it is all about general provisions, definitions, and trainings. So for part 1, chapter 1.1, it is all about general provisions. When you say provisions, it is the food and the needs of the seafarers on board. So for chapter 1.2 of part 1 is the definitions, units of measurement, and abbreviations. So for chapter 1.3 of part 1 is the training. So chapter 1.4 of part 1 is the security provisions. So the last chapter of part 1, which is chapter 1.5, is all about general provisions concerning radioactive materials. So let's move on to part 2, classifications. This is all about classifications. So for part 2, chapter 2.0 is the introduction. For chapter 2.1 is the class 1, which is mainly about explosives. And for chapter 2.2 of part 2 is the class 2, which is all about gases. And chapter 2.3 of part 2 is the class 3, which is all about flammable liquids. And then the next chapter is chapter 2.4, class number 4, which is all about flammable solids, substances liable to spontaneous combustion, substances which in contact with water and emit flammable gases. So for the next chapter is 2.5, which is the class 5, which is all about oxidizing substances and organic preoxides. Next is the chapter 2.6, class 6, which is toxic and infectious substances. For chapter 2.7, class 7 is all about radioactive material. So chapter 2.8, class 8, which is all about corrosive substances. And next is the chapter 2.9, which is all about the miscellaneous dangerous substances and articles and environmentally hazardous substances, which is the class 9. For the last chapter of chapter 2, part 2 is chapter 2.10, which is marine pollutants. So next is the part 4, packing and tank provisions. Under this part is chapter 4.1, which is all about the use of packagings, including intermediate bulk containers or the IBCs and large packagings. So next the chapter 4.2, which is all about the use of portable tanks and multiple element gas containers, which is the MEGCs. So next is the chapter 4.3, is all about use of bulk containers. So that's all for the part number 4. So next is the part number 5, which is the consignment procedures. Under the part 5 is chapter 5.1, which is all about general provisions. And then chapter 5.2, making and labeling of packages, including IBCs or intermediate bulk containers. So next is chapter 5.3, placarding and marking of cargo transport units and bulk containers. The next chapter 5.4, documentation. Chapter 5.5 is all about special provisions. So that's all for the part number 5. So let's move on to part number 6, which is all about the construction and testing of packagings, intermediate bulk containers, large packagings, portable tanks, multiple elements, gas containers, and road tanks vehicles. So, first, under this part 6 is chapter 6.1, which is all about provisions for the construction and testing of packagings. Next is chapter 6.2, which is all about provisions for the construction and testing of pressure receptacles, aerosols, dispensers, small receptacles containing gas, and fuel cell cartridge containing liquefied flammable gas. Next is chapter 6.3, which is provisions for the construction and testing of packagings for class 6.2 infectious substance of category A. Next is the chapter 6.4, provisions for the construction, testing, and approval of packages for radioactive materials and for the approval of such material. So, chapter 6.5 is the provisions for the constructions and testing of intermediate bulk containers. Chapter 6.6, provisions for the construction and testing of large packagings. Chapter 6.7 is the provisions for the design, construction, inspection, and testing of portable tanks and multiple element gas containers. Next is the chapter 6.8, which is all about provisions for road tanks vehicles and road gas elements vehicles. So next, chapter 6.9 is all about provisions for the design, construction, inspection, and testing of bulk containers. So that is the last part, or the last chapter of part 6. So let's move on to part 7, which is all about provisions concerning transport operations. So under this part 7 is chapter 7.1, which is the general stowage provisions. Chapter 7.2, general segregation provisions. Chapter 7.3, consigning operations concerning the packing and use of cargo transport units, or the CTU, and related provisions. Chapter 7.4, stowage and segregation on container ship. Chapter 7.5, stowage and segregation on ro-ro ship. Chapter 7.6, stowage and segregation on general cargo ships. And then chapter 7.7, shipborne barges on barge carrying ship. And then next is the chapter 7.8, is all about special requirements in the event of an incident and fire precautions involving dangerous goods. And chapter 7.9 is the exemptions, approvals, and certificates. So next task is task number 2, which is to outline the layout of the IMDG code volume 2, part 3, and the appendices. So part 3 is all about dangerous goods list, special provisions, and exceptions. So chapter 3.1 is all about general. So chapter 3.2 is all about dangerous goods list. Then chapter 3.3 is the special provisions applicable to certain substances, materials, or articles. And then chapter 3.4, dangerous goods packed in limit quantities. Then the last chapter of part 3 is 3.5, or the chapter 3.5, dangerous goods packed in accepted quantities. So the appendices. So appendix A is the list of generic and NOS proper shipping names. And then appendix B is the glossary of terms. So that's all for the task number 2. So let's move on to task number 3. Outline the layout of the IMDG code supplemental. So the contents is forward, page 5, revised emergency response procedures for ships carrying dangerous goods, EMS guide, page 1, dangerous goods, next medical first aid guide, for use in accidents involving dangerous goods, which is found in page 93. Reporting procedures, page 173. Next is the recommendations on the safe use of pesticides in ships, which is found in page 191. Next is International Code for the Safe Use of Pesticides in Ships Recommendations, International for the safe carriage of packaged irradiated nuclear fuel, plutonium, and high-level radioactive waste on board ship, is found on page 237. And then appendix resolutions and circulars related to the IMDG code and supplemental is found in page 247. So next contents is the forward, which is found in page 5. The preamble is found in page 7. How to use this guide is found in page 9. So in the fire section is the introduction to the emergency schedules for fire is found on page 11. Next is general guidelines for fire is found on page 19. Next is emergency schedules for fire found in page 21. And then next is the spillage section, which is first is introduction of the emergency schedule for spillage, which is found in page 35. The general guidelines for spillage found on the page 43. Emergency schedules for spillage found on page 45, and index is found on page 75. So that's all for all the tasks that our instructor gave us. Thank you.